Most people don't really understand how long eternity lasts. They often think it's forever, but it's actually 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and a few hours. It ended the same way it started, with my wife Tracy locking eyes with me and sharing a kiss. This time I was the one she was kissing. After I proposed to Tracy, I thought I'd follow up with a kiss on the night of the engagement party. I was in a different setting, a restaurant 2 towns away from our house. Tracy and her new partner exchanged glances and leaned in for a kiss. I ended up there with them. I don't know how it happened. The restaurant was an hour away. From our hometown, it seemed like they were trying to keep things on the down low at first. I was curious, but as the scene played out, I quickly went from curious to shocked, disgusted, and angry. I did think about confronting them physically, but I was taught never to hit a woman, so I sat there in complete astonishment, feeling safe in the knowledge that no one who knew them would see what was going on. I watched them eat their meal, sometimes kissing. I ate slowly, had dessert, and watched them throughout. I felt a range of emotions, from rage to helplessness. When they stood up, held hands, and left, I was left sitting there in silent rage. I felt like the most ignorant fool. I had been married to Tracy for over 14 years, with 2 years preceding that, yet I never suspected she was bi-curious. She never showed interest in another woman and never dropped hints in any conversation we ever had. I believed I knew her inside and out and was anticipating growing old together. The revelation of her bi-curious paled in comparison to the anger I felt at her apparent infidelity. Regardless of the gender of her partner, she had redirected her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago. When she accepted my ring, it seemed like we were in it for the long haul. Who would have thought that some relationships have an expiration date? I got into the car and drove home slowly. I had a lot to think about. Tracy didn't expect me to come back so soon, but I managed to sort everything out early, so I got back on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon. I'd been away since Monday morning, and apart from missing Tracy and the kids, the lack of closeness for more than 3 consecutive days left me with pent-up energy that needed release. At least until I witnessed what unfolded in the restaurant. I was an hour away from our hometown and could have easily driven straight through, but since I was ahead of schedule, I decided to go out to dinner for a break from us for driving, and the rest, that's history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for the evening if Tracy wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they were aware of the situation since neither had mentioned anything different. Perhaps they were as in the dark as I was. I thought, regardless, I knew they wouldn't be pleased with what happened next. On the way home, I did the usual I did some analysis. What did I do wrong? How long did it last? Etc. At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. I chuckled to myself. I'm talking about myself. Gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9 and Tracy still wasn't home. My daughters, Lisa, 12, and Ariel, 10, greeted me happily, but I watched. They seemed pretty nervous and unsure that I'd be home early. Tracy, on the other hand, seemed pretty relaxed when she arrived about 2 hours later. She must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I noticed a shift in her demeanor. She seemed less content than in our previous encounters. She asked me why I was there and seemed worried. I joked that if she'd known I'd be home early, I'd have had a nice dinner ready. She then told me she'd ordered pizza for the kids and had gone downtown with Kate to get wine and sandwiches. Tracy had got pizza for the kids and she and Kate had gone for wine and sandwiches in town. Tracy avoided eye contact and asked if I remembered Kate from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Tracy then proceeded to sarcastically recall Kate as a blonde with ample chest. I couldn't help but think that Tracy had the ability to assemble a football team merely by entering a room. This wasn't solely due to her captivating effect on married women. I used to think I possessed the allure of a goddess with my remarkable chest. She was around 26 years old and had started working at the insurance company where Tracy had worked the previous year. The two became friends right away, and at some point, Tracy could still turn heads. She was blonde with a beautiful figure and curves. She was still a great package, even though she was 10 pounds heavier than when we first met. Despite the worried expression on her face, Tracy acted calmly. I, on the other hand, was so tired I could barely stand. So I just told her I was tired, and as she was going to bed, she gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed up the stairs. I might have been mistaken, but I thought I could taste love-making games on her lips. I went to bed but didn't fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation, A few minutes later, I realized Tracy was talking to Kate on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Tracy getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I scared her so much that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was dreaming, and wouldn't I felt even worse when I found out. I didn't have to interact with Tracy too much for the rest of the weekend. She wanted to have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I said I wasn't in the mood and just left the room, effectively ending the conversation. I guess she must have known something was up. I sensed something was up because I'm rarely rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I asked my boss for the day off due to some personal issues I was facing. I'd gone through a divorce about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago. John, my boss, was understanding about the situation in the Mason family, especially given the success of my sales trip the previous week. He didn't hesitate when I asked for time off as I prepared to leave his office. He handed me his business card, which turned out to be that of his divorce lawyer. He expressed regret and sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Tracy, and I were on the same page. I'd also thought there'd be a long-term connection with Tracy. My boss suggested I speak to a lawyer, so I did. I got legal advice 2 days later. My lawyer said I should be more professional. She was really understanding and gave me gentle guidance. I didn't hire a private investigator to find concrete evidence of Tracy's infidelity. She seemed surprised, but I think she understood. She said that in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. She said the main issue could be potential challenges. When it came to visitation rights, she said it probably wouldn't be a big deal, no matter how much time I spent with Tracy and the girls at home. I couldn't handle it, though. I think the girls picked up on it, given how little we communicated. I gave Tracy plenty of chances to talk, but she never took them. The situation got worse when she was served at work the following week. I guess you could call it petty, but I wanted her to feel even a little of the pain I was feeling. I figure she was served around 11:03 a.m. My phone started ringing nonstop at 11:05, so I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unfamiliar numbers. I figured she might be using friends' phones to contact me. Surprisingly, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her with Kate. I was actually having a surprisingly good day. Tracy's car was already in the garage when I arrived at 5:30. She didn't waste any time in acknowledging her presence and expressing her anger about being served in front of friends and colleagues. I stayed silent until I'd entered the house and put my things down. The girls were in the living room, engrossed in what seemed to be a movie on the big screen. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure I told her she was being selfish and that she should have thought about how it would affect me. I also asked her how long she had planned to keep it a secret and when she was going to tell me. She said it had been about 6 months and that they were planning to tell me soon. Tracy's demeanor changed from angry to defeated. She went to the kitchen table and sat down. I went to the drinks cabinet, got a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could kill, she would have died right then. The first couple of seconds I observed her, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. I quietly asked how I couldn't have known about her switch hitting after all this time. She responded that she too had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned, it just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Tracy expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I expressed my shock, questioning whether 6 months was enough time. She wasn't ready to settle down. I told her that if she loved me, she'd stick to our vows and not look for other options. I said that fidelity was a universal concept and that she shouldn't have considered exploring at all. She replied that mistakes could be forgiven in a relationship. I pointed out that 6 months was a long time and that she'd made a conscious decision. I was frustrated because I felt like she was using her love for me as an excuse to do whatever she wanted. I told her that her actions had nothing to do with gender and that she needed to stop treating me like I was disposable. She was quick to respond, insisting that it had a lot to do with girls and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, pointing out that she was turning into a piece of garbage before my eyes and challenging her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I also accused her of being in love with the other woman, noting that I had fallen to second place. When she denied it, I told her to stop. I said that I knew what I saw and that I knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together despite her quick attempt to salvage the situation. I told her that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I said that everything might have been different if it were another man. It would be different if it were another man. At least then I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress and ultimately stolen my wife a few months later. I learned that the children knew nothing about Tracy's affair. They thought that Aunt Kate was. The kids knew about the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch between their mom and Aunt Kate, but they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner. They mentioned that Kate had been spending more time in the house since I moved in. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Kate was. Kate was one of the reasons Tracy and I were getting a divorce. We live in a no-fault divorce state, so our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay child support, and she got the house until the kids went to college. Of course, I had to pay child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Tracy and I stayed in touch with the girls through their activities, both in and out of school. Tracy and I tried to show them that we'd support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Tracy fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally did it. I was polite, but nothing more when I ran into Tracy and Kate at my daughter's parties were family events, and I was always invited. But I apologized and left when I knew Tracy would be there. I knew I was giving up some great family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my cool when she and Kate were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As you might expect, I did each. We kept the friends we had before we got married, and almost all the friends we made after we got married stayed with Tracy. One of the husbands explained to me that many of them felt awkward around me, given that I had lost my wife to another woman. It seemed like the consensus was that I somehow deserved it, and several of our married women friends almost made just that claim. I let them. I decided to go without a fight because, as the old saying goes, you learn who your real friends are under adverse conditions. I didn't date much for the next few years because my heart wasn't ready for this, and I didn't need much communication after a year of being alone. I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German Shepherd who was probably about 3 years old. I actually went to the shelter and asked them to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been there since he was a frisky puppy, but after being rejected repeatedly, he turned into a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest eyes I've ever seen on an animal. I felt like we were soulmates because we were both rejected. His name was Bob. Wasn't Bob just a cute name or something named after a Disney character? I called him Bob. When I first brought him into my apartment, he caught me right away. The first thing he did was climb onto the couch next to me and curl up. He was good with the girls when I had them over on the weekends, but I think Bob liked it best when it was just us. The guys at work loved to walk and ride with me. We could talk about almost anything. Bob was mostly silent during these conversations, but I knew from the look on his face and ears that he was paying attention to everything I said. A few years later, my oldest daughter Lisa met a guy from Boston in college and got married. I was doing pretty well in my engineering career at the time. In my career, I was able to afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I was so proud of her as I walked her down the aisle, but after the service, I got a telling off from her for ruining my one line. I realized this right during the rehearsal, but under the pressure of the real situation, my voice cracked. I came to my senses and responded to the question of who. I got married to Tracy with a simple I instead of the correct her mother and I. I told her I'd almost choked on my words. I sat down in the front row next to Tracy. She leaned towards me and quietly said it was disgusting. Kate, who was sitting next to Tracy, leaned forward and looked at me in a very bold way. I told her to forget it, just with my lips. If the pastor noticed, our exchange brought back memories for me. I looked back on my wedding day fondly at first, but this memory lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Tracy and Kate together in the restaurant. I found out about them when I woke up from my dream. Tracy was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. I wasn't the only one reminiscing, although I didn't try to eavesdrop. I noticed that Tracy and Kate seemed to be having a great time with Lee A. and her new husband Jerry and almost everyone else. That's when I realized I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room feeling sorry for myself. I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old scotch. I took a sip of the year-old Irish whiskey in my glass and sat down at my table, proud of myself for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to play the father of the bride again when my youngest, Ariel, had her beau walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet people, returning home from a 3-day trip. A few days later, I went on a day trip out of state. 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar and restaurant about an hour from my apartment. I usually avoid such bars due to my dislike of country western music, but they were advertising pork barbecue, so I decided to stop. The food was great, and as the DJ started playing music around 10 to 8. It was 8 p.m. I looked around to see if there was someone I could chat with. Just then, a 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked through the door. She was absolutely gorgeous, and I wondered why an unmarried young black woman was at the bar at this time. On the other hand, there I was, the lonely old white guy. I knew the guy she was with was probably too young for me, but I couldn't help but motion to the bartender to put everything she drank on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. I was surprised when she sat down next to me and introduced herself as Jade. She introduced herself as Jade. It was a pleasant evening. She suggested going to her place, catching me off guard. We headed towards the door when a man in a cowboy hat approached Jade and lightly kissed her cheek. I stopped abruptly and Jade reassured me, introducing him as her husband, Fred. She asked if he could join and have a look, to which Fred grinned and mentioned their involvement. I told him there was something wrong with the situation and that I didn't think it was right. I raised my hands to show I was done and left alone to my car in another attempt to find companionship. I turned to my church Carrie, who was 50. I met a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, a 34B chest, long legs, and a big smile. We got on well after a few dates and went back to my apartment, which led to closeness. However, during the encounter she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name, and things escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. In response, she expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. I drove her home, and needless to say, there was no fifth date for my next dating venture. I invited a coworker over for an evening of food and dancing. Allison Webbe, 42-old Dore, who'd separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was blonde with a slightly larger chest and a bump than someone of average proportions. We'd been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point she'd heard my sad story, and I'd heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful evenings, and we enjoyed each other's company even before our first time having sex. I was looking forward to a great time at the wedding. I invited Allison to be my date, but she responded seriously, expressing uncertainty about accompanying me to my daughter's wedding, considering the family dynamics with my ex. I told my wife that she'd need to get the okay from Bob, my wingman, a 45-pound German Shepherd mix with refined tastes. I said that if Bob didn't like her, he wouldn't go to the wedding with me. She thought this was strange and called me a peculiar person. After passing Bob's test the following week, Allison agreed to be my wedding date, which made the girls happy. However, Tracy seemed unhappy about this arrangement. She kept giving me disgruntled looks because I didn't engage with her much. I ignored her opinion, but it bothered Allison, who sensed Tracy's dislike for her at the rehearsal dinner. I found Tracy alone and finally confronted her, asking about her problem. Tracy responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Allison and questioning if I noticed that Tracy's jealousy didn't look good on her. I reminded her that Allison, Tracy, and Kate were the same age. I joked that Tracy had traded me for a younger female version, and she responded with shy grace. A year later, Allison became my I got a call at work one day and was told that I was a match for someone after 30 years. I was thrilled at the opportunity to help save someone's life. I knew the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat inconvenient, but I was willing to undergo the procedure. Further testing was required and, if it was favorable, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks after granting my consent. I told them I was on board. I'm not particularly religious, but I do believe in God. There's an old saying that God works in mysterious ways. I'd never thought about it until 4 days later, when I spoke on the phone to my oldest daughter, Lisa. During our weekly catch-up, Ariel and I avoid discussing Tracy's life. But Lisa mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Kate and they were actively involved. I conveyed my best wishes to Kate and Tracy, saying that despite the pain caused by their actions, I didn't wish them any harm. Lisa warned that as an adult I could call. I told them that I understood, but that I was trying to avoid saying anything I might regret later. Lisa encouraged me to accept the divorce, pointing out that I'd been happily married to Allison for almost 2 years. I told her that while I no longer hated Tracy, I wasn't on her Facebook friends list. I decided to send her flowers with a card of good wishes later on, as I ordered the bouquet. That's when I had a thought: bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence. It seemed too convenient that Kate found a match around the same time as me. I was aware of the anonymity in the donation process, so I contacted my registry contact, pretending to be optimistic, and asked about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She stuttered and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. I was frustrated and realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Tracy. I was angry about the situation and thought about how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life through a bone marrow donation. I decided it wasn't going to happen. 2 days later, I called my receptionist back and said I was refusing to make the donation. She almost burst into tears, but when she came to her senses, she asked me if there was any specific reason why I backed down. She explained that although I had the right to refuse, this was almost never done and would cause great consternation at the registry. I apologized for causing her distress, but told her it was in my own best interest to refuse. She muttered that she was sorry and told me that if I changed my mind I should probably call her back. Allison was pretty mad when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her that I'd found out who it was meant to go to. She just knew that I'd backed out of the deal to save someone's life. My wife was pretty frustrated, practically screaming at me. She was asking why, after saying I wanted to help, I now wanted to ruin someone's life. It was the first time I'd heard Allison use strong language, so I decided to be honest with her. I told her I wouldn't have told my ex-wife. I didn't tell Kate or my wife about the donation. If I had a choice, my wife was pretty unimpressed with my reasoning. She even accused me of denying Kate a chance at life for revenge. I clarified that it wasn't about revenge. I just wanted to emphasize that I'm trying to have as little in common with my ex as possible. I tried to keep my wife and Kate as involved as possible, even though they both hurt me. Allison asked if they knew about her involvement, and I told her that everything was done anonymously and that I only found out about it by chance. As I shared this, Allison's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity. To save someone's life, she said, I was in a position where I had to make a choice. She emphasized the weight of holding Kate's life in my hands and said I was too nice a guy to withhold help. She said the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, saying I wouldn't feel guilty as Kate and Tracy had broken my heart. I said I would do the right thing. They'd never know it was me. Allison was worried about the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. We kept having disagreements, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point she asked about my Christian charity, to which I responded by questioning whether I should blindly give money to someone who might damage me. She called me ridiculous in response. I explained that they hadn't torn out my heart and turned my world upside down like they did to me. I told her I wasn't going to just brush off the pain and help them after 17 years. I reminded her that Tracy had been married to Kate for longer than she had. I suggested she deal with it. Allison said they'd made a decision, and I replied quietly that they could live or not, indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room and told Allison I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner because the girls were coming and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder. She also told me to take a shower before we ate. I knocked. I shot 500 rounds from my 9mm, and it was the best way to unwind. I think it's because you have to focus intensely on the task at hand, and when you stop concentrating so hard, your body goes into a relaxed mode. At least, that's my thought, and I still stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home, so I quickly headed to the shower. I glanced at the dining table. It was set for 6 people. From the smell, Allison was cooking a roast. She is a great cook. I was hoping she would make these little I had brown potatoes instead of mashed potatoes. After taking a shower, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Ellie a glass of wine. She seemed a little nervous, which I put down to her wanting the dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was reading in the living room when the door opened and the girls came in, not with their husbands, but with Tracy and a rather shabby-looking Kate. I wasn't pleased to see any of them, so I shot Allison a look as I stood up to greet everyone. I kissed both girls, but didn't say anything. I noticed that my ex and Kate greeted Allison with what could be called enthusiasm. There seemed to be a lot of whispering, which I've learned not to take personally. I immediately knew that Allison had orchestrated this little intervention. I was more inclined to think of it as an ambush since apparently I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about just taking my phone and leaving, but then I decided it was time for me to speak up. However, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Kate's illness was the main topic of conversation. I was at the table, but I didn't join in the conversation. I was just sitting there, looking thoughtful. I thought the food was good, but I really couldn't tell. I was the host, so I made sure everyone had drinks in the afternoon. Then we moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I asked who would speak first. It was the woman who had betrayed my trust in arranging the meeting. It was the woman who had broken my heart years ago, but now I felt I owed her a favor. Or perhaps it was the woman who had taken a married woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband. The woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I made my statement, I looked at each face in turn and none of the women could meet my gaze. Allison seemed excited when I called her name, and my eldest daughter Lisa took the initiative to speak, acknowledging I was still angry at my mom and Aunt Kate, but they said I was being childish and petty by refusing to donate my bone marrow. Lisa said it was wrong to seek revenge by denying someone a chance at life, because it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act like hitting someone with a whipped cake. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat, shaking my head slightly. I told them I was angry and that everything we do in life has consequences. I said that Tracy and Kate never expected things to turn out this way, but they were now trying to make their problem mine. I talked about the unexpected chance to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me. Despite their belief that it was driven by revenge, I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the man who stole my wife survive? I don't think you even consider that. If her name was Carl and he was a 200B man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. I don't think I'd have much respect for the man who stole my wife if I helped him survive. I don't think any of you have considered that you think I should be easier on Kate because she's a woman. If her name was Carl and he was a 200B man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Kate tried to convey her feelings by staring intensely at the Tracy sat next to Kate on the couch. She put her hand on Kate's and gave it a gentle squeeze. I said that I wasn't driven by revenge when I made my decision, but I do hate Kate. I said that I despise her and that I have no intention of helping her in any way. I also said that I don't talk to her much at all, even though she was with Tracy for 17 years. Tracy started to cry and asked if I hated her so much that I'd want someone else to live instead of her. She tried to play on my past feelings for her, saying that I should consider it a noble thing to do. I replied, saying that I was skeptical about Tracy's idea of honor and that she was being a bit of a show-off. I also said that she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My volume level was pretty high at this point, and I was trying not to tell them all, including Allison, to burn in hell and leave me alone. I took a couple of deep breaths, and it seemed like Allison had decided that I wasn't angry enough. Then Lisa told me I'm a good person and always do the right thing. She said retreating is wrong and that I'd never be able to live with myself if I did that. I told her I taught Ariel and her to always do the right thing even if it seems wrong. She said she understood, but I told her my decision was to avoid any regrets or loss of sleep. Kate suddenly exclaimed that she didn't want to die despite acknowledging the offense I'd caused. She told me about the grim reality of her situation and the slim chances of survival unless I donated my bone marrow. Kate's eyes looked haunted as she asked me to help save her life. It must have been the hardest thing she's ever done. I looked deep into those haunted eyes and I didn't feel any joy at confirming my decision. I just said, no. I didn't say, I'm sorry, because frankly, I wasn't sorry. I won't do anything in my power to help this woman, Kate. I think Tracy took my answer better than Kate did. She was pretty upset. Allison went over to the couple to calm them down. I heard her whisper, I'll try. I'll talk to him. She was so caught up in the moment that Allison never realized that she had put our marriage in jeopardy. I'll have to think long and hard about whether I can bridge the gap in our trust. I grabbed the car keys from the key ring where they were located. I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days. I didn't answer any of the calls from Allison or the kids. The house was dark. I quickly looked around and decided that Allison had stopped somewhere else for the time being. A suitcase and some clothes were missing, but almost everything else was left untouched. I also grabbed my suitcase and packed a few things, taking most of my clothes and most of my belongings with me. I left my wedding ring in the middle of the kitchen table. 3 days later, at work, I got an anonymous call from Allison. She was really surprised that we were splitting up because I wouldn't do what she thought was really stupid. I was pretty shocked that she thought I'd do that. I said that we could work it out together. I said that I wasn't looking for revenge. I even referenced the Bible, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I told her she'd made a mistake and that she'd really messed up. Kate passed away 2 months after our official divorce. I found out through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case and none of my daughters kept me informed, even though we'd fallen out after the confrontation. I stood firm in my belief and stance of not helping Kate. I didn't change my mind, and I didn't let my daughters pressure me either. My decision was the right one for me. I never lost a minute of sleep. I wasn't able to give Kate my bone marrow because the people at the bone marrow registry didn't understand my situation and crossed me off the list. I was fine with this because there was little chance of me getting a second match. Bob wasn't happy about any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so, but that was okay because at 62 I wasn't looking for wife number 3. Surprisingly, I was. I was still getting my fair share of good times. I learned that at that age, eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4 to 1. If her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for a roll in the hay for the evening. Of course, we couldn't frolic with too much youth. After all, neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we both enjoyed a nice roll in the hay. I jokingly called my ladies my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years. When my youngest, Ariel, called to tell me that Tracy had died a few days ago, she thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and had 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I can improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back alone. It was a good ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from their families. Hi, this is Lisa, one of my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. After 3 minutes, Lisa fired the first salvo. She abruptly questioned why Aunt Kate was allowed to die. I responded, noting the unchanged nature of the conversation after 4 years. I referred to Kate as a wife and thief. I said it would be the final discussion on the matter and changed the topic. I pointed out a young man at the bar suggesting a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Lisa. Jerry said he'd hurt him. When I asked about an affair, he said the man would already be dead. I said that since he'd be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed. I said that I didn't save Kate's life partly because she was a woman, which might have been a mistake. I said that I shouldn't have saved the life of the man involved with my wife. Wife or the one who stole it? Jerry saw what I was getting at and looked around the room, seeing the same thing I did. I told him I wasn't proud of my decision, but I wasn't ashamed either. I said Kate didn't deserve my compassion for stealing the love of my life. Ariel asked how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I told her I loved her mother, but she broke my heart. A lot of that love turned to hate. I said that I was just a man, not the monster her mother made me out to be. I told them that things didn't turn out well for her mother and that karma eventually caught up with her and her friend. The other 4 adults in the room were crying, while the children looked confused and worried. I said that it would take time for us all to come to terms with the situation and that we shouldn't dwell on the past.